In 1918, while working a construction site in Kentucky, laborers uncovered a metal box that held 17 leather-bound ledgers. Inside were meticulous handwritten records, documenting the sale of 637 human bodies to medical schools across America between 1784 and 1821. Each entry ended with the same unsettling phrase, "Coffin weighted appropriately, family none the wiser." Most disturbing of all were the entries marked with small red crosses, signifying the 418 individuals who had not yet died when the Ashworth brothers chose them as specimens for their profitable trade. Before I continue with the chilling account of the Ashworth family and their grim enterprise at Death Valley Cemetery, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel for more true historical horrors overlooked by mainstream history. Tap that subscribe button and let us know in the comments which state you're listening from. We've already heard from passionate history hunters in all 50 states now. Let's step back into the Kentucky wilderness of the late 18th century, where three brothers would turn a peaceful cemetery into the heart of an operation that claimed hundreds of lives, in the cellar. Ezekiel would begin the preservation process, usually starting with an injection of alcohol, salt, and assorted herbs into the body's major blood vessels. Afterward, the remains were packed into a blend of salt and sawdust, placed inside narrow wooden crates that Mora crafted to look like ordinary tool chests. At the same time, Morai would prepare the coffin, filling it with rocks, sand, or, in winter, frozen soil, carefully balanced to match the expected weight of a human body. Once sealed, the coffin was ready for the funeral service, where Zechariah would deliver a stirring sermon on resurrection and eternal peace. All while the deceased's body rested not in the grave, but in the brothers' cellar, awaiting transport. The earliest entries in their ledger reveal a tentative start. In that first year, they shipped just 8 bodies to contacts at medical schools in Philadelphia and New York. Payments ranged from $17 to $25 each, generous sums when a skilled laborer might earn just $1 a day. Transactions were handled through traveling merchants, who unknowingly acted as couriers, carrying sealed packets they assumed were business correspondence. Received payment for subject number 8 today. Ezekiel wrote in April 1785, $23, our best price yet. Dr. H., at Pennsylvania Medical College, requests more specimens with healed bone fractures. Must keep watch for suitable subjects. By 1787, success emboldened them. They expanded the cemetery by purchasing neighboring land and extending the road to connect with the main trade route. Their services now reached settlements up to 20 miles away, enabling shipments to rise to 15 that year. Still, Ezekiel noted in his ledger, the isolation that once made this place ideal now limits our work. Zechariah argued for a wider reach, and Morai introduced an improved preservation method to keep bodies viable for study even after 2 weeks in transit. The Ashworths tended the cemetery with pride, rows of graves neatly aligned, marked by increasingly ornate headstones carved by Morai himself. Twice a year, Zechariah hosted gatherings to clean the grounds, plant flowers, and repair storm damage events that ended in a communal picnic among the graves. To outsiders, this might seem macabre, but on the frontier, death was a familiar neighbor. No one questioned the brothers' occasional absences, explained away as trips to buy supplies in larger towns or to visit relatives in Virginia journeys that, in truth, were for delivering bodies to their buyers or meeting new clients. As their dealings grew, the brothers developed coded correspondence with their medical contacts, sending letters through postriders. In these codes, bodies were study materials, fresh ones were green harvests, and preserved corpses became cured crops. Lumber terms described anatomical features. A body with tumors or growths was knotted, while straight grain meant ideal, unremarkable anatomy for teaching. By 1790, Their trade was so lucrative that they ranked among the wealthiest in the settlement. They lived modestly to avoid suspicion, investing profits into land across eastern Kentucky. Upgrades followed, a larger cellar with better ventilation, drainage, and a hidden rear exit for discreetly loading bodies into wagons. The townsfolk continued to respect the Ashworths, never suspecting the commerce happening beneath their feet. Everything changed at dawn on October 17, 1791. A letter arrived from Dr. William Hammond of Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia, carried by a passing merchant. Our need for fresh specimens has become desperate. It read in code. Recent legislation has restricted access to our usual sources. We will pay $40 per suitable subject, with bonuses for specimens of particular educational value. The advancement of American medicine depends on institutions like yours, which understand necessities that transcend common sensibilities. Ezekiel's ledger that night recorded the shift in tone. $40 per subject alters the calculation entirely. At such prices, we need not wait for death to come to Ashworth Creek. Travelers along the western road are often alone and would not be missed. Providence places them before us. It would be folly to ignore the opportunity. Their first deliberate victim was an unnamed traveler who sought shelter in the cemetery chapel during an autumn storm. Zechariah offered him warmth and supper at their home. The wine was laced with an herbal blend Ezekiel had learned of during his hospital days, potent, swift, and leaving no obvious trace. Subject number 73, he wrote clinically. Male, approx. 30 years, robust, surgical scar across abdomen, no identification. Administered solution at dinner. Effect immediate and appeared painless. Preservation begun within the hour. Should fetch premium price from Dr. Hammond. From there, murder became methodical. The brothers targeted solitary men bound westward, unlikely to be sought after. Zechariah drew out their stories with casual questions, testing for ties that might lead to an inquiry. Ezekiel kept watch at the crossroads for travelers alone, especially those carrying valuables, a detail that could suggest robbery if a body were found. Murray refitted the cellar into 3 chambers, enabling them to handle multiple corpses at once during heavy travel seasons. The poison evolved, breaking down quickly in the body and leaving little evidence, even under scrutiny. The brothers disposed of victims' belongings, burning papers, trading goods far from home. By 1795, the ledger showed astonishing growth. 28 bodies shipped, 19 the result of murder, earning over $1,100 that year, more than $23,000 in modern value, but ambition drove them further. As new medical schools opened along the eastern seaboard, demand surged. Buyers now included institutions in Baltimore, Richmond, and Boston. The risks increased with frequent shipments. To counter this, they perfected preservation techniques and built wagons with false bottoms. They cultivated stagecoach drivers and merchants to carry their medical supplies without questions. Most importantly, they formed relationships with physicians who not only knew the illegal nature of the trade, but actively shielded it, willing to pay dearly for the specimens that kept their lectures and research alive. By 1797, the Ashworth network had grown to include not just physicians, but men of influence. With local authorities, Dr. M. of Baltimore College has proven particularly valuable, Ezekiel noted that year. His cousin serves as magistrate in Harford County and ensures our wagons pass without inspection. In exchange, we provide 2 specimens monthly, emphasis on female subjects, which he claims are underrepresented in their teaching collection. This rising demand for particular body types pushed the brothers toward increasingly selective killings. Medical schools submitted orders, as if for rare merchandise, young men with strong musculature, elderly subjects marked by disease, women of childbearing age, or children with congenital defects. The Ashworths obliged, whenever possible, selecting their victims accordingly. The final ledger contains the most chilling proof of their growing web of complicity. 43 doctors, professors, magistrates, sheriffs, judges, and even to state legislators, whom knowingly supported the trade. Some accepted cash. Others demanded guaranteed access to specimens for their own institutions. The summer of 1800 marked another evolution. Zechariah, once the steady hand that maintained their public respectability, began traveling to nearby settlements as a visiting minister. These journeys served two purposes: identifying potential victims in other communities and establishing his presence beyond Ashworth Creek so that frequent absences drew no suspicion. On these trips, Zechariah sought out the vulnerable, the elderly, who lived alone, newcomers, without strong ties, the quietly ill. Upon returning, he would introduce Ezekiel as a doctor, with treatments unavailable locally. The medicine, of course, was always laced with their perfected lethal mixture. Ezekiel's August 1801 entry was matter-of-fact: acquired 3 subjects from Logan Creek this month. Zechariah's position as a man of God continues to open doors that would otherwise remain closed. People trust a preacher who brings a doctor to their sick bed. Their faith is touching if misplaced. Over time they grew bolder, occasionally targeting those well-rooted in their communities when the price for a certain type of specimen soared. Such deaths had to appear, natural in illness, that worsened despite treatment. A fatal fall from a horse, a drowning in a creek, between 1800 and 1810. The ledgers recorded 217 shipments, nearly 2 bodies a month, most the result of murder. By now, the Ashworths had perfected their roles. Zechariah identified, Ezekiel killed, Marai preserved and shipped. It was a production line of death operating under the cover of community trust. Ironically, that trust only deepened. Zechariah's congregation grew, drawing worshippers from miles away to hear his sermons on mortality and divine judgment. Ezekiel advised other settlements on cemetery management. Marai's coffins became so sought after that he trained apprentices careful, never to reveal the true nature of their work. In 1804, Zechariah allowed himself a rare personal note in Ezekiel's ledger: 20 years in this community, and they look to us for guidance on how to die well. If they only knew we are the most practiced shepherds of souls to the afterlife in all Kentucky. Now and then, danger loomed. In the spring of 1805, a merchant complained of a foul smell from a crate bound for Richmond. Marai invited him to dinner. The man was never seen again, later appearing in the ledger as subject No. 283. 2 years later, in 1807, Dr. Thomas Bennett, newly trained in Philadelphia, set up practice in Ashworth Creek. Alarmed by the unusually high death rate among travelers, he began asking questions. 3 months later, he was dead of what Zechariah gravely called brain fever, one of the rare victims actually buried in Death Valley Cemetery. By 1810, their reach extended through middlemen in Lexington and Louisville, connecting them to medical schools along the entire eastern seaboard. The network was sophisticated. Bodies were graded by quality. Unusual medical cases commanding prices over $100 a fortune at the time. Professors sent in special orders for precise conditions, and the brothers delivered. The War of 1812 brought disruption, but also opportunity. With normal trade broken, they stored bodies longer, using Ezekiel's improved preservation techniques. Wartime demand for anatomical training from army surgeons kept business brisk. By 1815, their quiet fortune exceeded $25,000, enough to buy vast properties across Kentucky under assumed ownership. Between 1815 and 1820, their peak years, they shipped an average of 36 bodies annually, their reach stretching from Boston to Charleston. Yet the very progress that had once shielded them now posed threats. Better roads meant more travelers through once isolated regions, but also more eyes. New towns established their own burial grounds, reducing dependence on Ashworth Creek. and improved communication made disappearances harder to explain away. In the autumn of 1820, the first true crack appeared in their empire. James Caldwell, a prosperous central Kentucky farmer, stopped in Ashworth Creek, en route to Virginia. Zechariah greeted him warmly after Sunday service, noting in the ledger, potential subject presented himself today, traveling alone, well-dressed, approx. 45 years, excellent physical condition. Suggest we wait for his return. Journey absence will be blamed on Virginia Road rather than our community. 2 weeks later, Caldwell returned and became subject No. 623. What the Ashworths could not have known was that Caldwell had recently married Elizabeth Harmon, a determined young widow, who would not accept vague explanations for her husband's disappearance. Elizabeth traced his route, confirmed he had attended service at the cemetery chapel, and arrived in Ashworth Creek herself. Zechariah assured her Caldwell had departed eastward before nightfall, but Marai's visible pallor at her introduction planted a seed of suspicion. She remained in town, quietly questioning residents. A boy recalled seeing Caldwell's horse tied behind the Ashworth home well after dark, contradicting Zechariah's account. When confronted, he claimed Caldwell had forgotten his gloves and returned. Briefly, Elizabeth knew better. Her husband never traveled without them in his saddlebags. On November 28th, she brought her concerns to the local magistrate. Magistrate Jacob Turner was, at first, less than eager to pursue Elizabeth Caldwell's suspicions. The Ashworth brothers were respected in the community, and her concerns seemed at least initially rooted in little more than a wife's anxious imagination. But Elizabeth's persistence, coupled with the precision of her questions, eventually wore him down. Turner agreed to at least pay a visit to the Ashworth home, using the expansion of the cemetery as a convenient pretext. When he arrived, the next day, Turner casually mentioned Elizabeth's presence in town and her unease over her missing husband. Outwardly, the brothers reacted with calm politeness. Privately, however, Ezekiel's ledger from that night recorded their alarm. Turner's visit indicates possible trouble. Mrs. Caldwell has approached local authority. Turner himself appears doubtful of wrongdoing, but we must quicken the current shipments, preparation, and suspend new acquisitions. Zechariah recommends a controlled fire in the storage cellar should events worsen. The matter might have faded had Elizabeth not taken a bold, calculated step. She declared that her husband, had he died on his travels, would have wished to rest in the family plot. She persuaded Turner to give her a letter requesting that any settlement where he might have perished exhume the body for transport to Lexington. This letter gave her a reason to ask after recent burials along his route and, more importantly, sparked her next move. On December 3rd, Elizabeth asked Zechariah directly if her husband had died while returning. How would the Ashworths have handled the funeral? As the only burial specialists in the area, Zechariah replied smoothly, describing their process for deceased travelers' dignified preparation, a modest chapel service, and a marked grave in the travelers' section of the cemetery. The next morning, Elizabeth returned, this time with Magistrate Turner, and delivered the request that would pierce the brothers' careful deception. In Zechariah's presence, she told Turner, "I have dreamt of my husband calling to me from this place. For my peace of mind, I must have the recent traveler graves opened. To be certain, he is not here misidentified or buried without my knowledge." This posed a serious problem. For locals whose bodies they shipped east, the brothers staged fake burials with weighted coffins. But murdered travelers were processed immediately, no graves to exhume. To comply would expose everything, Ezekiel objected, citing religious propriety and the risk of disease. Zechariah warned that such disturbance might draw divine punishment. Even Marai, usually silent, claimed the frozen ground made digging impossible. Turner might have been swayed till Elizabeth's request spread through the community. Martha Tunney, whose husband Henry had been buried by the Ashworths in 1785, rose at a gathering to say, "If it would ease this poor woman's heart, Christian charity demands we allow it. I would want the same comfort were I searching for my Henry in strange country." With public sympathy behind her, Turner ordered 3 traveler graves opened. The brothers had no choice but to comply, though Ezekiel's ledger that night betrayed their desperation. Turner demands grave examinations. No travelers are actually buried in these marked plots. Marai proposes reinterring a preserved community member from last year, but identification would be impossible. Best optional, Alvid dig and claim marker confusion. Prepare for flight if suspicions grow. On December 7th, Turner, Elizabeth, and several townsfolk gathered at Death Valley Cemetery. Morai and 2 helpers began excavating the grave of Jonathan Widd, September 1820. After an hour, the coffin emerged. When Morai pried it open, the crowd saw not a body, but stones and earth wrapped in burial linens, shaped to mimic human form. By midday, all 3 graves revealed the same Shamno bodies, only weighted coffins. Turner, visibly shaken, demanded an explanation. Zachariah feigned ignorance, suggesting body snatchers had stolen the remains. But Elizabeth cut through the lie. If grave robbers took them, why fill the coffins with rocks and rebury them, and how, without anyone noticing? Murmurs of suspicion spread. Turner confined the brothers to their home, posting guards more for their safety from an angry crowd than to prevent escape. That night, they acted. Ezekiel's final entry read, "All is lost." The woman's persistence has unraveled decades of work. We will implement the escape plan tonight. Records and funds are secured. God's work, as we define it, must continue elsewhere. Under cover of darkness, the brothers set fire to their house as a diversion and vanished with a wagon of supplies. The blaze, meant to destroy evidence, instead exposed their greatest secrets. While fighting the fire, townsfolk discovered a hidden trapdoor to an underground cellar. Below were 3 chambers. The first, filled with tools and chemicals for dissection and preservation. The second, holding 5 preserved bodies including James Caldwell, identified by the gold ring Elizabeth had described. And the third, stacked with 16 leather-bound ledgers spanning nearly 40 years of killings. Elizabeth, standing over her husband's body, said quietly, "I knew he was here." A wife knows when she's being lied to about the man she loves. The ledgers told the rest of the story. 637 victims in 37 years. Names of 43 physicians and officials complicit in the trade, and an interstate network supplying medical schools. Judge William Harrison, reviewing the evidence, wrote, "The demand for anatomical specimens created a market for murder on an industrial scale, and this unbelievably was only the beginning of the Ashworth case's grim legacy. There remains the unsettling possibility that, having refined their deception over decades, the Ashworth brothers simply resurfaced elsewhere under assumed names." As Judge Harrison wrote in his final 1825 report, "Men able to sustain such a facade of respectability while committing unspeakable crimes would find little trouble forging new identities on the frontier, where inquiries into a man's past are considered at best impolite." The case left a lasting mark on American medicine and burial customs. Medical schools faced tighter oversight, and new laws restricting the sale and purchase of bodies for dissection to strictly defined legal channels. Still, the chronic shortage of cadavers meant the illicit trade endured well into the 20th century. Communities across Appalachia adopted protective traditions, extended wakes where the body was never left alone, burial societies whose members personally witnessed interments, and most dramatically the sitting-up practice, where townsfolk kept vigil at a fresh grave for days to deter tampering. Ashworth Creek, its name forever tarnished by the crimes, was officially renamed Providence in 1823. Death Valley Cemetery was the families exhumed coffins only to discover, almost without exception, They held nothing but stones and dirt. Nature reclaimed the site by the mid-19th century, leaving only the communal grave marker as a reminder. The psychological damage ran deep. For years, neighbors had trusted the Ashworths, implicitly crying alongside Zechariah at funerals, thanking Ezekiel for his careful work, admiring Mariah's craftsmanship. Now they questioned their own judgment. Rebecca Lansing, a longtime resident, wrote to her sister in Virginia, "We invited wolves into our fold and called them shepherds. We gave them our dead to tend and never wondered why they prospered from such solemn work. What does it say of us that men capable of such cold evil were our most respected citizens for 40 years?" As the 19th century advanced, the Ashworth affair gradually slipped from public memory. Newspapers occasionally revisited it on anniversaries, but Victorian tastes found the details far too grim. By the early 1900s, it survived only as a criminal history footnote, sometimes mentioned in medical ethics debates. That obscurity ended abruptly in 1918, when road workers near Somerset, Kentucky, unearthed a metal box containing 17 leather-bound ledgers, the original 16 seized during the investigation, plus a missing 17th volume. This final book, hidden apart from the rest, contained contingency plans, coded maps to buried caches of money across eastern Kentucky, and a roster of contacts prepared to help the brothers reinvent themselves if exposed. Most chilling were Ezekiel's reflections on their decades of killings. In July 1821, mere months before their discovery, he wrote, "We have advanced medical knowledge more than any physician of our era. The bodies we provided trained hundreds of doctors who would otherwise have practiced with inadequate anatomical skill. If each of those saves but a handful of lives, our work has preserved more than we have taken. History, if it is honest, must weigh this calculus." The 17th ledger reignited scholarly interest, now held by the Kentucky Historical Society. Its contents analyzed with tools unavailable to 19th century. Investigators revealed a broader network than anyone suspected. The brothers had shipped remains to Edinburgh and Paris through discreet sea captains, and financial records suggest their trade earned the modern equivalent of over $4 million. Much of it unrecovered and possibly still hidden in those coded caches. Perhaps most disturbing, the ledger documented correspondence with at least 7 other parties running similar operations in remote Appalachian communities, all seeking Ezekiel's advice on preservation and transport. "Our methods have created a new industry," he wrote in 1818. "I share them only with those who grasp the necessity of discretion." Historians now believe the uniform preservation techniques found in many 19th century anatomical specimens may trace directly to Ashworth's influence. The ledger's closing pages outlined a relocation plan to the Missouri Territory, properties under assumed names, local references to vouch for them, and strategies for quietly integrating into new communities. "We will begin again, wiser for the experience," Ezekiel wrote. Zechariah suggests we operate apart, meeting only through couriers. The work continues, though our methods must adapt. Researchers traced their path as far as the Mississippi. River records hint that men matching their description boarded a riverboat for St. Louis in early 1822. But beyond that, the trail vanishes. Elizabeth Caldwell, the woman whose persistence exposed their crimes, remained in Kentucky. With part of her late husband's estate, she founded a Lexington school that evolved into a respected academy. She never remarried, instead dedicating her life to educational reform and oversight in medical training. In 1860, nearly 40 years after the case, she told the Louisville Courier, "I take no pride in uncovering such evil, only sorrow that my James and so many others were sacrificed to medical progress. If there is any comfort, it is that their deaths helped bring reforms to prevent such atrocities. The Ashworths taught us that society values some lives less than others. I hope we have learned, though I fear human nature changes little." The story of the Ashworth brothers is a stark lesson in how trust, respectability, and isolation can shield monstrous acts for decades. Their legacy, carried forward by disciples, may have shaped anatomical procurement practices across the eastern United States for generations. And it leaves us with a haunting question: how many other horrors still lie hidden in forgotten records and reclaimed cemeteries, waiting for someone relentless enough to unearth them?